I didn't plan on tearing up a brand new parking lot with a backhoe, but when you wake up one morning and someone's poured asphalt over your land like it's theirs, something in you just snaps, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and certain. Like, all right, if that's how we're doing this, then that's how we're doing this. My name's Daniel Harper, and for most of my life I've been the kind of guy who avoids trouble, not because I'm afraid of it, but because I've learned it's usually not worth the time. I grew up in southern Kentucky, moved down to northern Alabama in my late 20s, and somewhere along the way I scraped together enough money to buy a stretch of land right off State Route 53, about 40 acres give or take. Nothing fancy back then, just open pasture, a few trees, and a long strip of frontage that nobody paid much attention to. That was back in 2002, and at the time people thought I was crazy. What are you going to do with land out there? They'd ask, and I'd just shrug, because honestly, I didn't know either. I just had this feeling that someday it'd matter. For nearly 2 decades, that land didn't change much. I leased most of it to a local farmer named Clyde Benson, older guy, stubborn as a mule but honest, the kind of man who still shakes your hand like it means something. He ran cattle out there, kept the grass low, and every now and then we'd sit on the tailgate of his truck, drinking lukewarm coffee and talking about how everything around us was starting to shift, more traffic on the highway, new gas stations popping up, rumors of development creeping closer every year. Still, nothing touched my property. It just sat there, quiet, patient, like it was waiting its turn. Then around 2020, things changed fast. The land behind mine, about 60 acres that had been owned by the same family for generations, got sold off, and not to some local buyer either, but to a development firm out of Charlotte called Redstone Valley Group. Nobody around here had heard of them before, but within weeks their name was everywhere. Survey flags went up, trucks started rolling in, and suddenly the air didn't feel so quiet anymore. Clyde was the first one to mention it. He leaned against his truck one morning, squinting toward the back fields, and said, "You see what they're doing back there?" I said, "Yeah, looks like somebody's got big plans." He nodded slow. Big plans usually don't stay contained. That stuck with me more than I expected. About a week later, I got a call from a man named Eric Dalton, smooth voice, confident, the kind of guy who sounds like he's smiling even when he's not. "Mr. Harper," he said, "I represent Redstone Valley Group. We're developing a retail complex just behind your property, and we'd love to talk to you about acquiring your frontage or possibly working out an access agreement." I remember leaning back in my chair, looking out the window at that same stretch of land I'd owned for nearly 20 years, and thinking, here it is, this is the moment people told me would come. I told him straight, I'm not interested in selling. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. "Well," he said, adjusting his tone a bit, "perhaps a lease arrangement, then, something mutually beneficial." I didn't say no to that, not outright. I told him I'd consider it once I saw what they were actually building. And that's where things should have stayed, simple, professional, above board. But they didn't. Construction kicked off not long after. Heavy equipment, crews working from sunrise to sunset, the whole thing moving at a pace that made it clear they weren't messing around. I drive out there every few days, just to keep an eye on things, and at first everything looked clean, organized, like they knew exactly where their lines were. Then one morning, Clyde called me, and I could tell from the way he said my name that something wasn't right. "Dan, you might want to get out here." I said, "What's going on?" He hesitated, just for a second, then said, "They're working awful close to your fence, closer than I've ever seen." That didn't sit well with me. I grabbed my keys, headed straight out there, and the whole drive I kept telling myself it was probably nothing. Just equipment getting near the boundary, maybe a temporary staging area, something that could be sorted out with a quick conversation. But the second I pulled up, I knew it wasn't nothing. The front portion of my land, the part that ran along the highway, was covered in fresh asphalt. Not gravel, not dirt asphalt. Dark, smooth, still smelling like it had been laid down hours earlier, with painted lines already marking out parking spaces like it had always been there. I just sat in my truck for a minute, engine running, hands on the wheel, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was looking at, because there's a difference between someone making a mistake and someone acting like your land doesn't belong to you at all, and this felt like the second one. Clyde walked up beside the truck, shook his head, and said, "They didn't even slow down, Dan, just rolled right through like it was theirs." That's when something in me shifted, not anger, not yet, just clarity. I stepped out, walked up to the edge of that asphalt, and looked down the line where my boundary should have been, and I knew, without needing a survey, that they were well past it. I pulled out my phone and called Eric. He answered on the second ring. "Daniel," he said, cheerful as ever. "What can I do for you?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't swear. I just said, "You've got a problem." There was a pause. "What kind of problem?" I looked out across that brand new parking lot sitting on my land and said, "The kind where your company just built on property you don't own." Silence, just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected this call. Then he chuckled, light and dismissive. "I'm sure that's not the case. Our survey team is very thorough." I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see it. "Well," I said, "you might want to have them double-check, because I'm standing on my land right now, and I'm looking at your asphalt." That's when his tone changed, just a little. "Let me look into it," he said. "I'll call you back." And as I hung up, standing there with the smell of fresh pavement in the air, I had a feeling. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. This was the beginning of something a whole lot bigger. About 2 hours passed before Eric called me back, and in those 2 hours, I didn't leave the property. I walked the line twice, maybe 3 times, pacing it off the way my dad taught me when I was a kid, counting steps, lining up old fence posts, checking landmarks that hadn't moved in decades, and every pass told me the same thing. They weren't close to the boundary. They were comfortably over it. When my phone finally rang, I already knew the tone I was going to hear. "Daniel," Eric said, and this time the friendliness was thinner, like it had been stretched over something else. "I spoke with our survey team. Looks like there may have been a minor discrepancy." I let that sit for a second. "Minor," I repeated. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Nothing significant, maybe a few feet at most, and honestly, the way the layout works, it actually improves traffic flow for the development, so we were thinking." I cut him off. "You paved over my land." Silence again, but not the same kind as before. This one had weight to it. "Daniel," he said, a little firmer now, "let's not get hung up on wording. What matters is we can resolve this in a way that benefits both of us. We're prepared to offer you a lease, fair market value, maybe even above. You'd be generating income off a portion of land that wasn't being fully utilized anyway." There it was, not an apology, not even an acknowledgement, just a pivot straight into negotiation, like the decision had already been made and I just needed to catch up. I looked out at that parking lot again, the clean lines, the light poles already wired, the sense that this had all been planned long before anyone bothered to ask me anything. "I'm not leasing you something you took," I said. He exhaled, slow, controlled. "Be reasonable, Daniel." That word, reasonable, it always shows up when someone wants you to accept something that doesn't sit right. "I'll be clear," I told him. "You have 7 days to remove everything you built on my property, or I will." That landed harder than I expected it to. I could hear it in the way his tone shifted, the edge creeping in. "You don't want to go down that road," he said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded like a line from a movie, like he was used to saying it and getting the reaction he wanted. "Seems like I'm already on it," I replied, and then I hung up. Now, I'm not a lawyer, never pretended to be, but I'm also not the kind of person who throws around ultimatums without backing them up. So that same afternoon, I drove into town and sat down with a woman named Rebecca Alvarez. She'd handled a land dispute for a friend of mine a few years back, and from what I'd heard, she didn't scare easy. Her office was simple, neat, organized, no nonsense, just like her. I laid everything out, the history of the land, the construction, the phone calls, and she listened without interrupting, just taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification on something small but important. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, folded her hands, and said, "Let's start with the basics. Do you have a recent survey?" "I've got the original and one from about 10 years ago," I said. She nodded. "That'll do for now, but we'll likely need a new one." Within a day, she had someone out there verifying the boundaries, and when the results came back, they weren't subtle. "They're over by about 75 feet at the widest point," she told me, sliding the report across her desk. "This isn't a gray area. This is clear encroachment." Hearing it put that plainly did something to me. It took all the doubt, all the second-guessing, and just erased it. "So what's the move?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. We send a formal demand, immediate cessation of use, removal of all improvements, and a deadline, short one. 7 days? I asked. She gave a small smile. I like that you're consistent. The letter went out that afternoon, detailed, precise, backed by survey data, photographs, in a tone that made it very clear this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a demand. 3 days later, we got a response, not from Eric, but from their legal team. It was exactly what you'd expect. They called it a minor encroachment, argued that removal would cause disproportionate economic harm, and offered me a payment, $15,000 for a 5-year lease. I remember sitting there in Rebecca's office, reading that number twice, not because it was tempting, but because it felt almost insulting in how calculated it was, like they'd run the numbers and decided that was the price of me going away quietly. What do you think? She asked. I looked up and said, I think they don't believe I'll follow through. She nodded slowly. Then let's show them you will. That's when things escalated. Rebecca filed for injunctive relief, along with a claim for trespass and damages, and within a couple of weeks, we were standing in a courtroom in front of Judge Harold Whitaker. Older man, sharp eyes, the kind that don't miss much. Both sides presented their surveys, their arguments, their interpretations of what had happened and why. Their attorney tried to frame it as an honest mistake, a slight overlap, an unfortunate but understandable error in a large-scale project. Rebecca didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She just walked the judge through the facts, step by step, showing exactly where the boundary was, exactly how far they'd crossed it, and exactly how they'd continued building even after that point. At one point, the judge leaned forward slightly and asked their attorney, "Did your client seek permission before constructing on this portion of land?" The answer, after a brief hesitation, was no. That seemed to matter. The ruling came faster than I expected. Judge Whitaker looked down at the documents for a moment, then back up at both of us, and said, "The court finds that the defendant has encroached upon the plaintiff's property without authorization, removal of all improvements within 30 days, failure to comply will permit the plaintiff to undertake removal at the defendant's expense." 30 days. Clean, simple, final. Outside the courtroom, Eric approached me. First time we'd been face to face since all of this started. He looked different in person, not as polished as he sounded on the phone, a little more tense around the edges. "This didn't have to go this way," he said. I shrugged slightly. "You're right, it didn't. We can still work something out," he added, lowering his voice. "You're going to cause delays, serious ones." I held his gaze for a second, then said, "That sounds like your problem." For a moment, neither of us said anything, and then he gave a tight nod and walked off. And just like that, it became a waiting game. 30 days isn't a long time, but when you're watching someone ignore a court order, it can feel like forever. I drove out there every few days, sometimes just to see if anything had changed, sometimes because I needed to remind myself that this was real, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Nothing moved. No crews, no equipment, no signs of removal. The parking lot stayed exactly the same. Busy, even, cars coming and going like it belonged there. Around day 25, Rebecca called me. "They filed a motion," she said. "For what?" "Extension. They're claiming removal within 30 days would significantly impact their opening timeline." I let out a slow breath. "And we'll oppose it, but it's up to the judge." A few days later, the answer came back. Denied. No extension, no adjustment, just a reminder that 30 days had already been more than generous. And still, nothing happened. By day 30, I think part of me expected to see at least some movement, a crew, a barrier, anything that suggested they were finally taking it seriously. But when I pulled up that morning, it looked exactly the same as the day they finished it. That's when the deadline stopped being theoretical. That's when it became mine to enforce. I called Rebecca. "They didn't touch it," I said. "I know," she replied. "So what do you want to do?" I looked out across that stretch of asphalt one more time. The clean lines, the light poles, the quiet assumption that it would just stay there. Then I said, "I'm going to remove it." There was a brief pause on the other end. Not hesitation, just consideration. "All right," she said. "Then we do it by the book. Documentation, witnesses, everything clean." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah," I said. "Clean." But inside, it didn't feel clean. It felt like something that had been building for a long time, finally reaching the point where it had to break. And the next morning, That's exactly what I was planning to do. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not because I was unsure, but because once you decide you're actually going to follow through on something like that, your mind just keeps running, replaying every step, every possible outcome, every version of how it might go wrong or right. By sunrise, I was already up, coffee sitting untouched on the counter, boots by the door, and that quiet feeling was back again. The same one I had the moment I first saw that asphalt, steady, settled, like this wasn't anger anymore. It was just the next step. I called Tommy Griggs around 6:15. Tommy's one of those guys you don't have to explain much to, runs a small excavation outfit, grew up not far from here, and understands land the same way some people understand family. Personal, not just paperwork. You busy today? I asked. He chuckled a little. Depends what kind of trouble you getting into. I told him, not the whole story, just enough. There was a pause. Then he said, you got the paperwork to back it up? Court order, I said. Another pause, shorter this time. I'll bring the backhoe. By 8:30 that morning, I was back out on the property. Rebecca was already there, standing off to the side with a folder in her hands, calm as ever. She gave me a small nod when I walked up, like we were about to start a meeting instead of whatever this was. You ready? She asked. I looked out across the lot. Cars still parked there, a few people walking toward the development behind it, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Yeah, I said. We'd already notified the county sheriff's office the day before, not because we needed permission, but because it's better to have everyone aware when something like this is about to unfold. Around 9 o'clock, a deputy pulled up, stepped out, and just kind of leaned against his vehicle, watching, not interfering, just present. Tommy rolled in a few minutes later. Big yellow backhoe on a trailer, engine rumbling low, the kind of sound you feel in your chest more than you hear. He climbed down, walked over to me, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, point me where you want me to start. I didn't answer right away, just took a few steps forward, onto that asphalt, looked down at it one last time, smooth, perfect, like it belonged somewhere else. Then I turned back to him and said, right here, everything past that line. He followed my gaze, nodded once, and didn't ask another question. When that backhoe fired up, the whole space seemed to shift, like the air itself knew something was about to change. A couple of people nearby stopped walking, turned to look, confusion at first, then curiosity. Tommy eased the bucket down, pressed it against the surface, and for a second, nothing happened, just metal against asphalt. Then he pushed. The first crack wasn't loud, but it was final. The asphalt split under the pressure, jagged and sudden, like something breaking that had no intention of ever going back the way it was. Tommy lifted the bucket, curled it, and peeled up the first section. Thick, heavy, curling like torn fabric. And just like that, it started. He worked methodically, not rushed, not aggressive, just steady, carving through row after row, pulling up chunks of pavement, exposing the dirt underneath like it had been waiting there the whole time. The painted lines disappeared first, then the smooth surface, then the illusion that this had ever been theirs. I stood off to the side with Rebecca, arms crossed, watching it happen, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something shift in me as each section came up. Not satisfaction exactly, something quieter than that, something like balance being restored. About halfway through, a black SUV came flying into the lot, stopped hard near the edge, doors opening before it even fully settled. Eric stepped out first, no smile this time, no smooth tone, just anger, plain and visible. Behind him was a man I'd seen once before, probably their site manager, both of them walking fast, like they could still stop what had already started. What the hell do you think you're doing? Eric shouted as he got closer. Tommy didn't even look up, just kept working. I stepped forward a little, meeting him halfway. You had 30 days, I said. You can't just destroy our property, he snapped, gesturing wildly toward the torn-up asphalt. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a folded copy of the court order, and held it out. It's not your property, I said. And this says I can. He didn't take the paper, just stared at it, jaw tight, like reading it wouldn't change anything anyway. This is going to cost you, he said, voice lower now, more controlled, but sharper. I shrugged slightly. It already did. For a second, I thought he might keep arguing, push it further. But then he looked past me, at the backhoe tearing through another section, at the deputy standing off to the side, at Rebecca, watching quietly with that same calm expression, and something in him shifted. Not acceptance, not really, but recognition. He turned without another word, walked back to the SUV, and slammed the door harder than he needed to. By late afternoon, it was done. Every piece of asphalt gone. Light poles pulled, base rock hauled off. The ground graded back down to bare dirt, like none of it had ever been there in the first place. Tommy shut down the machine, the engine ticking as it cooled, and climbed down. "Well," he said, glancing around, "that's about as clean as it gets." I nodded, looking out over the land, my land, back to what it was before someone decided they didn't need to ask. "Yeah," I said quietly, "that'll do." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A couple weeks later, I got served with papers. Redstone Valley was suing me, claiming I'd caused nearly $50,000 in damages, loss of business, delays, the whole list. When I showed it to Rebecca, she didn't even look surprised. "Let them," she said. The hearing didn't take long. Maybe an hour, start to finish. Their attorney argued that the removal had been excessive, that it could have been handled differently, that I'd acted in a way that caused unnecessary harm. Rebecca stood up, handed the judge a copy of the original order, and said, "Your Honor, the defendant failed to comply within the allotted 30 days. My client acted within his legal rights, exactly as authorized." That was it. Judge Whitaker barely needed to deliberate. The case was dismissed, and not just dismissed. He ordered them to cover my legal fees, the cost of the excavation, and the updated survey. Clean, final, done. But here's the thing people don't always talk about. Even when you win something like that, it doesn't feel the way you think it will. Yeah, there's relief, sure, maybe a little pride too, but there's also this lingering question that sticks with you. Could it have gone differently? I still drive past that property sometimes. The development behind it eventually opened, scaled back a bit, redesigned, and my land is still there, unchanged, just like before. Except now there's a story tied to it that wasn't there before. Some folks around town think I did exactly what needed to be done, that if I'd let it slide, it would have set a precedent, opened the door for more of the same. Others think I went too far, that there were other ways to handle it, quieter ways, less destructive. And I get both sides. I really do. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about asphalt. It was about boundaries, about whether those lines actually mean something, or whether they only matter until someone decides they don't. So I'll leave it there. If you were in my position, standing on your land, looking at something that shouldn't be there, knowing you had every legal right to remove it, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have handled it differently? Let me know what you think. I'm genuinely curious where people land on this one. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone crossed a line, literal or otherwise, I'd like to hear that too.